It started with a quiet piece of land, a long-forgotten lot tucked between two upscale neighborhoods in a small but growing town. To anyone passing by, it looked abandoned. Weeds had swallowed the cracked foundation of what was once a farmhouse, and the chain-link fence leaned like it was tired of standing guard. But I knew better. That land had a story, and more importantly, it had my name on the deed. My grandfather bought it in the 1970s, back when the area was nothing but rolling fields and dirt roads. When he passed, it came to my father, and when my father passed, it came to me. I paid the taxes on time every year, kept the paperwork in a fireproof box, and figured one day I'd build something small, a cabin maybe, or a quiet home away from the chaos of the city. But years went by and I barely visited the land. I moved to another state, got busy with work, and only checked in through satellite images now and then. It was still there, just an empty lot waiting for a dream. Until one day, I zoomed in on the map and saw something that shouldn't have been there. Concrete foundations, trucks, cranes, dozens of workers. At first, I thought I had the wrong address. Maybe the GPS was off, but when I panned the view and matched the boundaries, my stomach dropped. They were building on my property. It wasn't just a fence or a shed, they were constructing entire villas. Luxurious ones, with driveways, pools, and landscaping, the kind you see in glossy real estate ads. For days, I scoured the internet. I found promotional listings by a local HOA development company called Crescent Ridge Estates. They were boasting about a new phase of luxury living, 12 exclusive villas with private access and full HOA amenities. The images matched what I saw from above. The only problem was, Crescent Ridge's development was supposed to end 2 streets over. The parcel they were building on? Mine. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe some clerical error, some mix-up with county zoning. But when I called the county recorder's office, their tone changed. The clerk hesitated before transferring me to someone higher up, and that's when I realized they had no record of the sale. No permit filed for that parcel. That lot was still legally in my name. That's when the anger started to creep in. Slow, controlled, like a simmering fire. I wasn't the confrontational type, but this wasn't a fence dispute. This was an entire housing development illegally built on my land. Most people would have stormed over, called the police, or made a scene. But I didn't. I decided to wait. I let them build. I watched as months turned into a year. I drove by a few times, pretending to be just another curious passerby. I saw the villas rise from the dirt one by one. Smooth white stucco walls, Spanish tile roofs, stone pathways curling through manicured gardens. They built roads, wired utilities, even installed streetlights. Every nail they hammered, every pipe they laid, was technically mine. I took photos, recorded timestamps, kept track of every permit they did file on surrounding parcels, but not mine. And I said nothing, because I knew that when it was finished, I'd have something much more powerful than a complaint. I'd have proof, and in property law, proof can mean millions. When the villas were complete, Crescent Ridge threw a grand opening. There were banners, balloons, even a ribbon cutting with the town mayor. Local news called it a symbol of progress and prosperity, but I stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in my pockets, smiling quietly to myself. They had no idea what was coming. They had built 12 villas on land they didn't own. They had sold units to buyers who never checked the deed. And the HOA, so proud and self-assured, had no clue that everything they had created stood on stolen ground. The first families began moving in. Shiny SUVs rolled through the gates. Children played on driveways. It looked perfect, but perfection has a price, and soon I'd be sending them the bill, because while they built walls and driveways, I built a case, and in the shadows of their shiny new villas, a storm was quietly gathering, one that would shake Crescent Ridge to its core. The day I decided to open that old metal drawer felt heavier than I expected. It was the same drawer my father once used to keep every important document: tax receipts, birth certificates, car titles, and most importantly, the property deed my grandfather signed more than 50 years ago. The papers were yellowed, edges curled with time, but the ink, his signature, was still strong. Right there in bold cursive was the name that tied me to the land they had stolen. My grandfather's, my father's, and mine. Written on the line below. No sale, no transfer, no lying. Just a perfectly clean chain of ownership. I laid the deed on the table next to the photos I had taken of the construction. 12 completed villas with families living inside, all built on my soil. For weeks, I couldn't shake the image. Every window that lit up at night, every porch light that came on at dusk. They all flickered on my land. But I didn't rush. Because this wasn't about rage anymore. It was about precision. I began my research. County zoning maps, survey records, tax parcels. Each one confirmed the same thing. The boundary lines of my lot were clear. No overlap, no easements. The HOA had simply built beyond their permitted development zone. The arrogance of it was stunning. I found the developer's name. Raymond Keller, president of Crescent Ridge Estates HOA. He had a reputation for aggressive expansion, the kind of man who saw empty land as opportunity, not ownership. To him, a signature was just an obstacle to be worked around. But this time, he worked around the wrong man. As I dug deeper, I found something even more unbelievable. Not only had the HOA built on my property without permission, they had sold the villas. Sold them to families who had no idea their houses stood on land that wasn't legally part of the HOA's estate. They collected homeowners' dues. They issued permits. They held meetings on my property. I documented everything. Every legal misstep. Every date. Every photo. I went to the county assessor's office in person just to confirm. The clerk at the desk looked stunned when I slid the paperwork across the counter. She printed the records, frowned, and whispered, "This can't be right. Your lot number matches their entire new street." Exactly. They'd built an entire neighborhood on a technical oversight. But in real estate, a technical oversight can turn into financial disaster. The thought crossed my mind. I could call them, demand a payoff quietly, and make it all disappear. But the more I thought about how smug Keller looked in every press photo, smiling beside the mayor, boasting about Crescent Ridge's expansion vision, the less I wanted to take a settlement. No, they needed to learn what it felt like to be small, to realize that arrogance built on someone else's land eventually sinks. So I started assembling my team, a property attorney, a surveyor, and a private investigator who specialized in real estate fraud. We spent weeks building the case file, aerial photos, property lines, timelines of construction, even HOA newsletters bragging about Phase 3 of Crescent Ridge Villas. The investigator found emails between Keller and the contractors, where Keller casually dismissed boundary warnings, saying, "The owner's long gone, it's county easement now." He was wrong. I wasn't gone. I was very much alive, and watching. The night before I filed the lawsuit, I couldn't sleep. I walked the perimeter of the property one last time. The villas looked peaceful under the moonlight. Sprinklers hissed quietly, watering lawns that technically belonged to me. Each one of those houses, worth nearly $1 million, sat like a trophy of someone else's greed. And tomorrow, all of it would shift, because tomorrow I'd bring the deed to court, not to threaten, not to beg, but to reclaim. The sound of crickets filled the night as I stood by the curb, watching porch lights flicker off one by one. Families inside, blissfully unaware that the land beneath their feet was about to become the center of a storm. I didn't hate them. The homeowners. They were victims too. They trusted the HOA. They believed in the illusion of security, community, and shared ownership. But soon, they would all learn a hard truth. Trusting the wrong people and property can cost you everything. I went home, locked the deed back in my case folder, and placed it gently inside my briefcase. The courthouse opened at 9, and when those doors opened, Crescent Ridge Estates would face the one thing they could never bulldoze: the truth. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and cold air, the kind of sterile calm that hides chaos beneath the surface. I arrived early, briefcase in hand, the original deed tucked inside a protective sleeve. My lawyer, Patricia, was already waiting on the steps, flipping through her notes with that sharp, controlled focus that made her so effective. "This isn't just trespassing," she told me that morning. "It's unauthorized construction, misrepresentation of ownership, and unlawful sale of property. They built on your land, then sold it. Every buyer has a void title. This could destroy their entire HOA. That's exactly what I wanted. Not for revenge, but for justice. Slow, calculated, undeniable." Inside, The courtroom buzzed with the low murmur of lawyers, clerks, and homeowners who'd been summoned by the court notice. Many had no idea why they were there until the hearing started. I could see the confusion in their faces. The HOA board members sat together in neat suits, whispering nervously. But their president, Raymond Keller, sat tall and smug, the same grin he'd worn in every press photo. When the judge entered, the room went silent. Patricia stood, clear and confident. She began to lay out the evidence: tax records, parcel maps, deed history, and satellite imagery. Piece by piece she told the story, not of a man wronged by bureaucracy, but of an HOA blinded by greed. As she spoke, I watched Keller's expression change. His grin wavered. His jaw tightened. When she handed the judge the original deed, the same one signed by my grandfather, a heavy quiet fell over the room. "This," Patricia said, her voice steady, "is the original deed to the parcel known as Lot 27B. It has never been transferred, sold, or relinquished. My client, the rightful owner, has maintained continuous ownership and paid property taxes in full. The HOA's development, Crescent Ridge Phase 3, was built entirely on this parcel. Every structure, every villa, every foot of concrete sits on land that legally belongs to him." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some homeowners turned toward each other, whispering in disbelief. A woman covered her mouth. One man in the back stood up, shaking his head as if trying to deny what he'd just heard. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses, eyes scanning the documents. Then he looked at Keller. "Mr. Keller, do you have documentation showing that your organization lawfully acquired this property before construction?" Keller's lawyer stood, fumbling with his notes. "Your Honor, there appears to have been a clerical misunderstanding during the land acquisition phase. The judge cut him off. A misunderstanding that resulted in 12 multi-million-dollar villas being built on land your client did not own?" The silence was suffocating. Patricia stepped closer to the table. "Your Honor, we are not seeking immediate eviction of the homeowners at this stage. What we are requesting is recognition of ownership, an injunction on further HOA activity, and damages for illegal use of private land." Keller's lawyer objected, rambling about intent permits and good faith development. But the judge wasn't listening to excuses anymore. He was staring at the aerial map projected on the courtroom screen, my lot's boundary drawn in bright red, surrounding every villa, every driveway, every manicured lawn. It was undeniable. The HOA had built their empire on stolen ground. The hearing stretched into hours. Reporters filled the hallways, scribbling notes, calling it the Crescent Ridge land shock. By the end of the day, the judge issued a temporary ruling, acknowledging me as the legal owner of the land and freezing all HOA operations until a full civil trial could determine damages. Outside the courthouse, chaos erupted. Cameras flashed. Homeowners demanded answers from Keller, who barked something about legal appeals and property reassignment. But everyone could see the truth. He was cornered, and I didn't even have to raise my voice. That night, I drove back to the property. The villas stood silent, perfect, illuminated by streetlights that now felt like spotlights on the crime scene. A couple walked their dog along the road, unaware that the ground beneath them had just shifted, legally and financially. It was surreal. In the span of a day, I had gone from forgotten landowner to the man who owned an entire luxury neighborhood. Not because I built it, but because someone else built it for me. Patricia called that evening with updates. The HOA's accounts were being audited. Their insurance company had frozen claims. And the homeowners? They were panicking. Many demanded full refunds from the developer, who suddenly had nothing left to give. The storm was only beginning. In the coming weeks, there would be lawsuits, settlements, and media attention. Crescent Ridge Estates, once the pride of the town, would become a symbol of greed, arrogance, and oversight. But for me, the next step was clear. I wasn't done yet, because owning the land was just the start. Now I wanted justice, for every lie, every backroom deal, every signature forged in arrogance, and I had the patience to see it through. In the weeks that followed the court hearing, Crescent Ridge Estates, once the pride of suburban luxury, began to crumble from the inside out. What had started as whispers in the courtroom now roared through the entire town. Local news ran nightly segments titled "The Stolen Villas Scandal," Reporters camped at the neighborhood gates. Drones hovered above the immaculate rooftops. The HOA's glossy brochures, the ones that promised peaceful luxury living, were suddenly symbols of humiliation. And at the center of it, all stood Raymond Keller, the man who thought he could outsmart a forgotten land deed. The first cracks appeared within his own circle. Homeowners who had paid hundreds of thousands for their dream villas discovered their property titles were legally void. Their names on paper meant nothing without legal land beneath them. Some demanded refunds. Others threatened lawsuits. One family even put up a for sale sign in panic, only to realize no one could legally buy a home built on stolen soil. Crescent Ridge's once pristine lawns became battlefields of emotion, shouting matches, HOA meetings that devolved into chaos, and news vans parked outside the gates like vultures waiting for the next fall. From a distance, I watched it all unfold, calmly, methodically. My attorney advised patience. "The HOA is collapsing," she said. "Let the dust settle. Once the court confirms ownership, we'll pursue compensation. They owe you, in land value, damages, and rental income, millions. Millions." The number sounded unreal, but so did the situation. Meanwhile, Keller scrambled to control the narrative. He released public statements blaming administrative confusion and missing records. He tried to portray himself as a victim of bureaucratic error, but it didn't work. The documents spoke louder than excuses. The county's own zoning maps proved he'd knowingly overstepped boundaries. Then came the investors. The developers who had funded Crescent Ridge filed their own lawsuits, claiming Keller had misled them too. The HOA's bank accounts were frozen. Construction crews abandoned unfinished projects nearby. Crescent Ridge, once a symbol of affluence, now resembled a ghost town dressed in marble and stucco. I drove by often, not out of spite, but out of disbelief. To see 12 immaculate villas sitting silently on land that was once overgrown with weeds, and to know every inch of it was mine again, it felt surreal. But behind the satisfaction, there was something heavier. Guilt. Not for Keller or the HOA. They earned their fate. But for the families. The children who played in yards now tangled in lawsuits. The people who had simply wanted homes and ended up caught in a corporate nightmare. Some reached out to me directly. Letters in the mail. Emails. One even left a note under my truck's windshield. "We didn't know. Please don't take our home." Their words cut deeper than I expected. My lawyer reminded me I was under no obligation to help. "They bought property illegally constructed," she said. "Their fight is with the HOA, not you." But I couldn't shake the image of those families packing up boxes, losing everything because of someone else's arrogance. So I made a choice, one that surprised everyone, even Patricia. Instead of demanding immediate eviction or demolition, I filed a motion allowing the homeowners to remain as tenants, paying fair rent directly to me, the legal owner, until the matter was fully resolved. It wasn't charity. It was structure. Stability in the chaos. The court approved. When the news broke, public opinion shifted. The headlines changed from "Local Man Sues Homeowners" to "Rightful Owner Offers Grace in HOA Scandal." The same reporters who once chased Keller now called me the calm storm that took down Crescent Ridge. And behind the scenes, the financial pressure crushed Keller completely. His investors withdrew. His bank accounts were seized for fraud investigation. His company's license was suspended pending a state audit. The man who once smiled under ribbon cuttings and flashing cameras now faced ruin. Not from force, but from truth. I thought it would end there. But it didn't. Because while Crescent Ridge fell apart, something unexpected happened. Other developers and HOAs started to panic. Across the county, old land deeds were being checked, boundaries re-verified, and property maps redrawn. Keller's downfall became a warning to every greedy developer in the region, and my once-forgotten piece of land became the case study they all whispered about, the empty lot that destroyed an empire. But for me, it was never about fame or money. It was about legacy, restoring what my grandfather had built and what arrogance had tried to erase. Still, I knew it wasn't over. Keller wasn't the type to disappear quietly. Whispers began surfacing that he was planning a counterattack, that he'd found a loophole, a way to reclaim control through a corporate technicality. I didn't know what it was yet, but I could feel the tension building again, like the quiet before another storm. And as the sun set over those silent villas, mine yet not mine, I realized this battle wasn't finished. It was only changing shape. For a few weeks, the storm seemed to calm. Crescent Ridge sat quiet, its manicured lawns still green, its villas standing like monuments to arrogance. The media had moved on to newer scandals, and for the first time in months I allowed myself to breathe. But peace, I've learned, never lasts long when pride is wounded. It began subtly, a letter. Plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a single page stamped with a corporate seal. Crescent Ridge Development Holdings, LLC. They were back. Keller had found a way to twist the knife. The letter claimed that, per a recent restructuring of Crescent Ridge's corporate assets, my property was now under dispute. They alleged that the original land survey had misaligned coordinates, suggesting that the villas only partially overlapped with my parcel, and that they held rights to the improved sections. In short, Keller was trying to reclaim part of my land through corporate trickery. It was audacious and dangerous. Because if the court believed even part of it, I could be forced into a costly, drawn-out legal war. Patricia wasn't surprised. "He's desperate," she said. "He's drowning in lawsuits and debt. This is his last lifeline. Muddy the waters, confuse the record, and hope you'll settle." But settling wasn't an option. Not after everything. We dug into his claim and discovered the scheme. Keller had quietly created a new shell company, a fake landholding subsidiary, and registered it with nearly identical documents to the original HOA. He even used the same project name but changed one letter in the filing. On paper, it looked legitimate. He was hoping bureaucracy would do what his bulldozers couldn't: steal my land again. So I fought back. For the next 2 months, my team worked around the clock. We subpoenaed his filings, his emails, his bank transfers. The deeper we went, the darker it got. Keller had funneled funds through multiple shell corporations to hide assets. He'd bribed a county contractor to alter digital zoning coordinates, shifting property lines just enough to make it look like the villas overlapped only slightly with my parcel. It was fraud. Plain and simple. But exposing fraud isn't easy when the lines between paper and power blur. While the investigation unfolded, tensions at Crescent Ridge flared again. The homeowners were exhausted. Half of them wanted to stay and fight. The other half wanted out. The HOA's board had collapsed entirely. No meetings, no maintenance, no leadership. Weeds crept through sidewalks, and the once gated community began to feel like a gilded cage. Then one morning I received another call from Patricia. Her voice carried the restrained excitement of a hunter cornering prey. "We got him," she said. The investigator had found the missing piece, an internal email from Keller to his engineer, sent months before construction began. In it, Keller explicitly acknowledged my parcel as privately owned. His words were chilling. "The deed owner's inactive. No one will notice. Build through it. We'll fix the paperwork later." That single sentence destroyed every claim he'd made since. We filed the evidence under fraud and deliberate trespass. Within weeks, a new hearing was scheduled. Not a civil dispute this time, but a full-scale fraud proceeding. The courthouse once again filled with reporters and restless homeowners. Keller appeared, but the arrogance was gone. His once crisp suit hung loose on his frame. The confidence in his stride had dissolved into nervous pacing. When the evidence was presented, the email, the shell company filings, the altered coordinates, the judge's patience ran out. "This is not a clerical error," he said sternly. "This is deliberate deception, fraud upon the court, and theft of property." Keller's lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him. In a single gavel strike, the court reaffirmed my ownership, voided every fraudulent filing, and referred Keller's actions to the district attorney for criminal investigation. It was over. Completely, undeniably over. When the verdict was announced, I didn't feel triumph, not the way I expected. I felt something deeper. Closure. The kind of quiet satisfaction that comes when justice finally catches up to arrogance. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed again, but this time, the story wasn't about scandal. It was about resolution. Local man reclaims stolen neighborhood. HOA fraud exposed. That night, I returned to Crescent Ridge one more time. The villas glowed softly under the streetlights. Empty driveways, silent porches. The neighborhood that once symbolized greed now stood as a monument to truth. But even as I stood there, something inside me shifted. Owning this land, these homes, it didn't bring the joy I thought it would. What mattered wasn't the property. It was what it represented. My family's legacy, protected against the kind of arrogance that thinks power can rewrite truth. Still, the story wasn't quite finished, because with Keller gone and the HOA dissolved, I now faced a new decision, one that would determine what happened to Crescent Ridge next. Would I sell it? Keep it? Or turn it into something that honored the past instead of exploiting it? As the wind rustled through the empty streets, I knew the answer would define the final chapter. After the courtroom battles ended and Keller's empire fell apart, there was an eerie silence that settled over Crescent Ridge. The lawsuits, the press, the outrage, all of it faded into memory. What remained was the land itself. Quiet. Heavy with history. 12 empty villas stood like monuments to greed, their windows dark, their manicured lawns beginning to yellow under the neglect. The HOA signs had been torn down, the gates left open. What had once been Phase 3 of Crescent Ridge Estates was now simply mine. The court's final ruling had made everything official. I was the sole undisputed owner of the entire property. The land, the roads, the villas, the utilities. The court had even ordered restitution from Crescent Ridge's investors, compensating me for damages, lost value, and emotional distress. In the end, the total amount was more than I'd ever imagined, enough to rebuild my life twice over. But when the dust settled, I didn't feel rich. I felt responsible. Because this land wasn't just dirt and deeds. It was legacy. My grandfather had bought it for the simple dream of a quiet life. My father kept it safe through decades of neglect and rising taxes, and I had nearly lost it. Not through carelessness, but through arrogance from people who believed ownership could be overwritten by influence. Standing in the middle of the once private street, I realized the villas were never truly what mattered. The land was, the roots beneath it, the story it carried. Over the next few months, I visited often. At first, I walked the property line, tracing the boundaries that once existed only on paper. Then I began clearing overgrown areas, reclaiming corners left untouched since construction. The air smelled of dust, sun, and new beginnings. Neighbors from surrounding streets stopped by occasionally, curious. Some of the displaced homeowners returned too, cautiously, humbly, asking what would happen to the houses they'd once called home. I didn't turn them away. One by one, I spoke with them, listened to their stories. Many had lost their savings because of Keller's deception. Others were still in legal limbo, their mortgages voided, their faith in home ownership shattered. And slowly, an idea began to take shape. Instead of selling the land to another developer or demolishing the villas, I decided to rebuild Crescent Ridge. Not as an HOA, not as a symbol of luxury or greed, but as something honest. A place where fairness and integrity stood above bureaucracy. I worked with local officials and urban planners to convert the villas into affordable community homes, with transparent ownership, clear titles, and no HOA interference. A few of the original families even returned, buying their homes legally this time, directly from me under fair contracts. It wasn't about profit, it was about restoration. And for the first time in years, Crescent Ridge became what it should have been all along, a community. Children laughed in driveways again. The lawns grew green. The air of fear and suspicion that once haunted the neighborhood began to fade. Meanwhile, Keller's name vanished from the papers. His companies dissolved, his assets seized. The man who once ruled an empire of rules and regulations now existed only as a cautionary tale in real estate circles, a reminder that arrogance doesn't last forever. Months passed. Seasons changed. The villas no longer felt like symbols of theft. They felt alive again. One evening, I stood on the same hill where my grandfather once surveyed his land, the land that had nearly been erased from his family's name. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the roofs in gold. For the first time, I felt peace. I opened my briefcase one last time and pulled out the original deed, now weathered, creased, but still intact. I ran my hand over the ink of my grandfather's signature, the same one that had survived decades of storms, negligence, and greed. Then I placed it back in its folder and locked it away again, not out of fear this time, but out of respect. That piece of paper wasn't just proof of ownership. It was proof of endurance. The story of Crescent Ridge wasn't one of revenge anymore. It was a story of reclamation, of standing quietly against power and winning through patience, truth, and time. As night fell, the streetlights flickered on, casting warm halos over driveways that were once battlegrounds. A soft wind moved through the trees, whispering across the villas that now belonged to good, honest families. For years, people would ask how I managed to stay calm through it all, how I didn't lose control or let anger guide me. The answer was simple. When you know the truth is on your side, you don't need to shout. You just wait. Because truth doesn't need to fight. It just needs time to be seen. And in the end, time had done exactly that. Crescent Ridge had fallen, but from its ruins something stronger had risen. Legacy. My grandfather's legacy. My family's name. And the quiet victory of patience over pride.